there are a few commentators in contemporary America that have as much heft, and perhaps as much, conviction for the truth as Tucker Carlson. And he was recently on an interview with Glenn Greenwald that I found quite interesting, but at the very end of the interview, there was something he said that troubled me, and evidently troubled a bunch of other people. He basically, and I'll actually let him speak for himself, but Carlson basically called libertarian economics, as he calls it, and I have problems with the phrasing, but we'll get to that in a second, a scam created by the ruling class to create the society they want. Now, this has elicited a lot of responses from the old guard of the right, people like Ben Shapiro, who have made videos about it, just attacking Carlson, making straw men, in my opinion. Shapiro's response was not very good at all, in my opinion. I say that respectfully. Or people on the libertarian right, like Hannah Cox, who just insulted Carlson. Carlson's one of the most insightful commentators of our time, and even though I don't agree with him on everything, there are some things we disagree with, I myself think I am a fan of Carlson because, to be frank with you, I don't spend my time watching a bunch of other commentators. I just don't. When I'm doing commentary myself, I'm trying to become a content creator full-time, so I don't have time to let my mind be enrafted by a bunch of different thoughts, but Carlson's opinions tend to be pretty good. So let's look at what he said. I'm going to play you the whole thing in the context it was meant to be played in, and I'll come back and I'll address some of the concerns I have with his line of thinking, and I'll also hopefully help refine his own thoughts in a way that doesn't sacrifice so-called sound economic thinking, but actually integrates sound economic thinking with also a desire to preserve the culture that Carlson has. So watch this.
But it also kind of transformed economic policy. He frequently kind of denounced the classic sort of Reaganomics, this idea that, we should all cheer for the richest people in our society to get richer because a rising tide lifts all boats, and everybody watches Raytheon and Boeing and BlackRock and Amazon get richer and richer and richer, and their boats aren't rising. And it really led a lot of people who have been capitalists their whole lives to at least start questioning not capitalism as a theory, but capitalism, how it manifests in American society. What is your view about sort of where the populist right is, the Trump movement is, when it comes to these core questions of economic theory and economic populism?
I think a lot of people have awakened to the now demonstrable fact that libertarian economics was a scam perpetrated by the beneficiaries of the economic system that they were defending. So they created this whole intellectual framework to justify the private equity culture that's hollowed out the country. That's my personal view, and I've seen it up close my whole life, so I think it's a fair assessment. I think a smarter way to assess an economic system is by its results. So you can assign whatever name you want to the economic system of the United States. You could call it market capitalism. You could call it, you could call it a whole host of different things. But I don't think any of that's useful. Those are boring conversations. I think you need to ask, does this economic system produce a lot of dollar stores? And if it does, it's not a system that you want because it degrades people and it makes their lives worse and it increases exponentially the amount of ugliness in your society. And anything that increases ugliness is evil. And it's just let's just start there. So if it's such a good system, why do we have all these dollar stores? Dollar store is the clear, it's not the only ugly thing being created in the United States, but it's one of the most common, and it's certainly the most obvious. So if you have a dollar store, you're degraded. And any town that has a dollar store does not get better, it gets worse, and the people who live there lead lives that are worse. So, and the counter argument, to the extent there is one, they buy cheaper stuff, great, but they become more unhappy. And the dollar store itself is a sort of symbol. What's a physical thing? It's a real thing. It's not just a metaphor, but it's also a metaphor for your total lack of control over where you live and over the imposition of aggressively in-your-face ugly structures that send one message to you, which is you mean nothing. You are a consumer, not a human being or a citizen. And so, again, I don't know what we call our current system, but its effects are grotesque. They're grotesque. It's wrecked. I've been here 54 years and I watch carefully. That's my only gift, is I watch. And this has become a much uglier place, a much more crowded place, a much more hostile place, a place that cares much less about people. So whatever system that produces that outcome is a bad system. And you can call me whatever you want. Oh, you're a socialist. I don't care what you call me, actually. I'm beyond caring.
Okay, so he said a lot of things that I think are very important. I think before I actually get into critiquing the statements he made about libertarian economics, so to speak, or before I critique his statement about the dollar store or whatever, let me make something very clear. There is often a tendency on the political right. This is especially true in the post-Reagan era. There is a tendency on the political right to simply endorse the doctrine of negative rights, which I endorse, which is to say that you have rights that are God-given, that are given by nature or whatever, and those rights put in a position on the government not to interfere in your life. But they don't actually want to address the culture in which those rights would be acted out in. Because while the doctrine of negative rights is absolutely important, and I support it myself as a constitutionalist and as a supporter of the natural law tradition in America, as Jeffersonian, I'm all in for those things, you can't simply talk about the government being limited and not address the importance of culture. Because you can have the most limited government in the world. If your culture is corrupt, your culture will still produce political chaos. It won't just produce political chaos. It'll produce societal and civilizational chaos. And that's kind of what Carlson is trying to say. He's saying we've been put in this posture where we have traded off things like beauty and universal value for short-term consumerism and materialism, and that has had a negative impact on the lives of people, had a negative impact on the futures of people. That's his argument. Now, while I don't necessarily agree with the culprit, he blames libertarian economics. Again, I'll explain in a second. I don't agree with the culprit, and I absolutely do not agree that consumers having a lot of options in regards to a particular kind of brand of store or a particular kind of genre of shopping makes their lives worse. I do agree that we have not paid enough attention, especially on the right, because this was the context of the question asked by Greenwald beforehand was about changes in the thinking of people on the right in America. We've not actually asked the question on the right, how do we fix the cultural ills in our society beyond simply calling them out, beyond simply owning the libs, which is just so anti-intellectual and things of that sort, and beyond combat? How do you fix these things? And if you ignore these things because your conception of political order is concerned solely with limitation and not with human flourishing, then you're going to have bad consequences, very simply. So let's address the actual substance of Carlson's critique the best way I can. So libertarian economics, from what I gather, is a shorthand for the kind of free market thinking that has prevailed in certain sectors of the West, most notably probably America, and perhaps secondarily probably Chile, and contemporarily most likely the Scandinavian countries too, because even though they are mistaked as being socialist, what they are is they're free market systems that have certain levels of government control. So they're not really free markets as much as they are mixed economies that have incredibly visible portions of the free market working on their society, which makes their prosperity more evident. That is what libertarian economics is a shorthand for, but it also refers to the theory of Austrian economics. Now, Austrian economics is based on the idea that microeconomic interactions, that means interactions between individuals in the economic sphere, are the unit of measurement for economic prosperity, and they are the unit of measurement for economic order. So basically, how John goes to Jenny and sells Jenny something, and Jenny sells him something, the exchange of value, and how all these different systems and ideas, like supply and demand, and surplus value, and all this stuff that you learn in high school in America, interact with how individuals buy and sell. But Austrian economics also goes right to the core of the principle of human interaction, because it says that economics is just not about numbers and coarse grain charts and GDP and all of these broad things, but rather economics is about how human beings make choices in social contexts. So fundamentally, Austrian economics, as all economics should be, is a social science. It's probably the only valid social science. Sociology is a bunch of gobbledygook rhetorical verbal muddle mixed with philosophically corrupt ideas that reduce human beings to broad groups and abstractions and reject the individual in almost every case. Economics, rather, looks at the individual and says, okay, what informs his actions? Why does he do it? How does he do it? So it's concerned with human activity in society. That's the fundamental concern of Austrian economics. Now, Carlson may be pointing to this as the culprit because people who are progenitors and proponents of Austrian economics, like Friedrich Hayek or Friedman, who was a proponent of a different variation that was close to Austrian economics, but not exactly the same, the Chicago School, have informed presidents and leaders of many countries, including here in America. They were a massive influence on Ronald Reagan, who we'll get to in a second. And their thinking has been implemented in certain aspects of policy when it relates to economics in America. So that's why he may be saying libertarian economics, because he's talking about the market system as idealized in the American context and put into policy. So with that in mind, it's very obvious to say libertarian economics was not invented by anybody. Rather, it was simply a series of principles and conclusions that a bunch of smart people recognized and wrote about in terms of how man interacts with society and how he can grow in society with the exchange of skills, goods, and services. Goods and services actually comes second, which is the second problem with Carlson's critique. Carlson puts the idea of the market economy in the context of materialism and the destruction of beauty. When in all reality, if we really understand economic action, which is just individuals and human beings freely trading in accordance with their values, we would first understand that economics is a matter of values, not a matter of material consumerist goods. Consumerism, which is really an epithet these days, and it's really a bad one, but I'll just use it for the sake of this video. Consumerism is a result of an individual's desire to take the products of someone else's skills and someone else's merits and benefit from them in his own way in a society of mutual exchange. That is consumerism. Now, if consumerism begins at the base level as a matter of values, then you should expect that if someone's values have a certain character and constitution, how he buys things with those values will also have a certain character and constitution. What am I saying? What are you saying, Christian? What's all these big words for? What I'm saying is, in a society that is based on the idea that individuals have a choice on what they wish to buy, sell, trade, and consume, ultimately, how that manifests will depend entirely on the values of that society. And this is true even here in the United States of America. What people decide to buy, sell, trade, and consume in Wyoming is not the same as they would in New York City. In fact, in Wyoming, it's much cheaper. I've been to Wyoming. It's a beautiful place. Everyone in America or anyone around the world who wants to see natural beauty in its most undiluted form in a Western context should go to Wyoming. Seriously, it's beautiful. But because the values of Wyoming are so radically different from the values of people in New York City. Radically different. And so it shows up there. So in Wyoming, you see a lot of mom and pop shops. You see a lot of old historic downtowns in which Carlson would call beauty, because there is an emphasis on preserving that. Whereas in New York City, you see the perhaps undistilled products of industrialization, giant skyscrapers, machines everywhere, cars honking their horns. You have smog in the air. You've got a lot of bad smells, and there's good and there's bad. But here's the point. If individuals value community, if they value beauty, their consumerist choices will reflect that. If individuals, on the other hand, value materialism and vanity, their consumerist choices will also reflect that. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is the true culprit that Carlson is trying to nail down here is not libertarian economics. It's not laissez-faire economics. It's not the market system. The true culprit is a deterioration of cultural values that has taken place for a variety of different causes that the market system only is a receiver of, because the market system is secondhand to the culture. The culture is here. Imagine the culture as a river. The culture starts at the headwaters. It goes downstream. Then the market system is right here in the middle of the river to filter out and to direct into different streams. The market system is a product of the culture. The culture is not a product of the market system. So if people like Big Macs and they value Big Macs more than they value their health, and they value pleasure eating more than they value smart eating, you'll see a lot of McDonald's. In a society that values hiking and exercise and physical fitness, you'll see a lot of Bass Pro Shops and other mom and pop hunting shops. And you see this differential all across the country. What I think is, a lot of people on the populist right, which by the way, I have sympathies. I think that populism is a preferable mode of political action to internationalism and globalism and top-down tyranny. I think that populism, informed by the right values, is actually pretty, in our current era, is needed. Because right now, in our current era, we're being raked over the coals by internationalists, by globalists, by bias of the Atlantic Council and the United Nations that want to control the domestic decisions of the United States and also want to control how we use our military, which should only be used for our national self-defense and our national self-interest, but is instead being used to finance foreign excursions that people at the very top think will benefit the world in some way, or maybe benefit them by lining their pocketbooks with money. So there's a bunch of reasons why populism is more preferable than the alternative right now, even if we have some issues with populism, the contents of populism in some instances. But the thinking is that a market economy sees everyone just as materialistic markers on a GDP chart, on a graph chart. And it dehumanizes people so much so that it can actually just ship their jobs away to other places because they don't actually matter. They're just commodities. They're just resources. The idea of human resources may capture the sentiment. They're not people. Well, here's the real truth about that. When you have a system that is based on the maximization of value, not profit, because profit is a byproduct of value, the maximization of value, then you have to understand that everyone will have their own independent considerations. And whereas you may see dehumanization and a company having to go to China to make cheaper products, the people of America, the people in a community that's poor, may instead see a benefit because their pocketbooks are not being so horribly affected by products that are overpriced and not economical because the company decided not to put its bottom line at the forefront. There's all kinds of considerations to go into these issues. What a lot of people do is they will view the world solely in reference to their own personal lives and their own personal subjective tastes. It's not evident to me that Carlson's a man that values culture, that values aesthetics, that values beauty. So am I. Part of being a conservative is valuing that sort of aesthetic phenomenon that inspires wonder within your soul about the world. But while I value those things, and I value them immensely, I also understand those things throughout human history have been discovered and made manifest by the works of genius men when they had the freedom to do so. And this is what it all goes back to. This all goes back to the people having the freedom to pursue their passions, to pursue their fascinations, and then to bring them into the forefront. And the market system is the best system known to man that allows people to do that. Because if you're not free in your economic relationships, you can't really be free in anything else. Because man's economic relationships are simply the way and manner in which he interacts with the world at large, beyond his own personal self. But let's talk about Reagan for a little bit. Ronald Reagan. There's this mythos in conservative circles where Ronald Reagan is considered to be a deific figure almost. And I think Reagan himself, as a communicator of conservative ideas, and as the harbinger, a legacy of Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley in the context of anti-communism, he was absolutely excellent. And he's the quintessential example of what I wish most politicians would be. Someone who's smart but not pretentious, someone who has moral conviction but is not overly rigid, and most importantly, someone who is willing to face down evil and speak to it in the manner that is both courageous and bold. But having said that, we should not let the good qualities of Reagan overshadow the limitations of his own legacy. And the limitations of his own legacy have indeed been a lot of conversation about his economic policy. You will see progressives oftentimes talking about trickle-down economics or Reaganomics or whatever. And they will attribute this to free market capitalism and to libertarian economics or whatever. And so it's important to understand that Reagan was riding a wave that came out of the 60s, that came out of the Barry Goldwater type movement, which is really at the beginning of modern day American conservatism, that rejected communism, rejected collectivism, and wanted to have a society in which people were free. Conservatism in America was really founded off of the idea that communism was bad, and there are certain things in a society that human flourishing requires, and freedom should be maximized in order to ensure that, within the context, of course, of traditions and reason and things like that. So it wasn't just a free-for-all, but it was indeed a movement based on the individual, the spiritual value of the individual, and individual freedom. That's what it was. And that's just what it is. And so Reagan was produced by that phenomenon. Right? There are phenomena in political history that produce things, that make things, and that bring people to rise. But Reagan never really lived up economically to that free market capitalism that so many people attack him for. He never did. Reagan started office with 4 goals in his 1981 program for economic recovery. It was 1, to reduce the growth of government spending. 2, to reduce the marginal tax rates on income from both labor and capital. 3, to reduce regulations. And 4, to reduce inflation by controlling the growth of the money supply. Now, it's well known that Reagan never actually reduced spending. In fact, defense spending went up more under his presidency than what he wanted in his own 1980 campaign. He never did that. And since he never reduced spending, he was never able to really capture the spirit of economic growth that he would have been able to otherwise. Spending declined a little bit, but not enough to actually make a difference. And the growth of defense spending actually did slow down economic growth. We should also understand that with taxes, and this is oftentimes the line of attack you'll see against Reagan. With taxes, okay, he did some substantial things. Reagan cut the marginal tax rate on individual income from 70% to 28%. Reagan also cut the corporate income tax rate from 48% to 35%. Yet, Reagan still funded Social Security, Medicare, and entitlements. David Stockman, who was the budget guy under Reagan, one of the most brilliant economic minds in contemporary American politics, he left the administration because he was dissatisfied with Reagan's desire to spend a lot of money while cutting taxes. Cutting taxes only works if it truly reduces the foot on the neck of the consumer, of the individual. It never works when the government is still funding other binds on the individual, like the welfare system, at an exponential higher rate or at all. Stockman knew this, and this was the source of his complaint. And if you ask him today, he's still living as the posting of this video, he would tell you this exact thing. So Reagan actually disappointed a lot of his own supporters because he wasn't really fiscally conservative. He still preserved the vestiges of socialism, Social Security and Medicare in America. So it's important not to deify him and not to view him blindly, but to view him as a man that was complicated and to view his legacy as a legacy that was complicated, but still to respect what he represented. But this is all I'll say this. We've never really had, quote unquote, libertarian economics, free market economics in America. We've never really had that undiluted. Even in Reagan, which is arguably the period in which it was the most potent, these free market ideas, they still didn't manifest in the way that is required to truly see the fullness of their merits. So I say this to Carlson and to anyone who may be watching my channel, who may be a fan of his. I say this to them. The concerns that you have about beauty are important. The concerns you have about culture are important. The concerns you have about the preservation of dignity are important. But the culprit is not the free market. The culprit is instead something within the cultural ethos, something within the hearts of people in the culture that have mixed up and confused proper values for things that are not values at all. And a culture that aggrandizes the digital era, TikTok, clickbait, short-term thinking over long-term thinking, in a culture that does not value philosophy or anything like that, in a culture that does not value learning beyond what is required to exist in a society at the bare minimum rate, we don't have a problem of capitalism or the market system. We fundamentally have a problem of individual drive and will. It was the same individual drive and will that people are using to be lazy that actually created American civilization, that actually created the inventiveness of the industrial era, that actually gave us the life we have now. And it's that same lack of drive, or that same use of drive not to do anything, not to be productive, that is demeaning the life we have now and degrading the quality of our civilization. Ultimately, it comes down to individual choice, beloved. It comes down to what informs someone's action and what they do with that information. We have a crisis of the mind right now, an educational crisis of the mind, a crisis of moral education in the West, a crisis of cultural education in the West that are stunting people. That's why on this channel, I endorse the revolution of the mind, because we have one thing. I understand the requirements of human flourishing. Part of that's freedom, yes, but the other part of that is human good values. And that's what we should focus on. Let's not bash capitalism or the market. Let's focus on the culprit, the real culprit, and deal with it. Cast down rhetorical fascinations. Rhetorical fascinations are the understanding of concepts that confuses your real understanding of concepts. So like, for example, people saying that there's trickle-down economics. That's a confusion of a concept. Because when there's a tax cut for a company or a whatever, the employees are the ones who actually feel the effects first, not the top. They feel the effects with higher pay, higher wages, reduced hours, whatever. Less work, whatever. But the rhetorical fascination against capitalism has made it so much that letting someone keep their money is now offensive to the common man. No, taking someone's money, stealing from them, under the guise of taxation, and then pretending as if you are helping them by funding services that don't even answer to them, like the police or whatever, the judiciary, which is run away right now in this country, the military, which is used by bad interests to do bad things, is ridiculous. We are a classical Republican state. We are a state where the representative government is the standard, and we must restore that. And we can do that by fighting the real culprit. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. Be sure also to, if you want to donate to me, help me keep lights on, you can go Patreon, PayPal, anywhere you want. I'm there. Join my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. Guys, love you guys so much. Share this video, please. Get it out there to all your friends. And most importantly, stay pensive. Bye, everyone.